721 here, Big 550 KTRS. Our next guest wants to be your next treasurer. He's at Missouri State Center. He's Eric Schmitt, friend of the show. Good morning, Eric Schmitt.
Good morning.
Let's first start with this hashtag pork steak rebellion. What's going on here?
It has taken off.
What's going on?
So last weekend, not this past weekend, but the weekend before that, I read an article about how the EPA was funding a University of California study on the carbon emissions of backyard barbecues and how that could potentially be dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so I retweeted the story and put a hashtag on it that we were going to start a pork steak rebellion, being a native St. Louisan and a lover of the pork steak.
Yes.
And it took off. It's been pretty remarkable. There's been a lot of national attention. There were people tweeting from all over the country, all over the world. There was somebody from Australia that said that if it ever made its way down to Australia, there'd be a Barbie rebellion. So but all kidding aside, it does. I think it does touch on some underlying issues that people are frustrated with. Wasteful spending to spend money on something like this. And then number two, the idea that the EPA would have anything to do with our 4th of July backyard barbecues is ridiculous. And I think you just have to call this stuff out as early as you see it, and hopefully something can be done before we get to a place where there's any regulations on this.
Does anybody know over at the EPA that there is a fire in a trash bin next to a bunch of nuclear waste? And that might be a little bit more pressing than the carbon emitted by our backyard barbecues?
There is certainly an issue of priorities. But, there was a few years ago, people were talking about, they'll never regulate wood-fired stoves. Well, in rural Missouri, that's actually a really big deal. So in the legislature, we've heard a lot about that over the last few years. The EPA wants to regulate. A lot of homes are heated through wood-fire stoves in rural Missouri, and they're beginning the process of regulating those. And so, not to get too far ahead of this, but certainly I think at a minimum, it is a waste of money, or would make barbecues a lot more expensive if they had. The study calls for like a double secret filtration device on these propane barbecues, which is just, again, it's ridiculous.
Right.
I think
a catalytic converter for our Weber.
So people have submitted renderings of what that might look like on Twitter too. So
all right, fair enough. Now, Eric Schmitt, you're the one pushing this municipal city reform bill. First, let's ask, where is that in the process? So
a few weeks ago, 5 or 6 weeks ago now, the Senate passed Senate Bill 5, which was my bill that dealt with this taxation by citation, 34-0. We actually had at the hearing, and I was on the show, I think, right after this, conservative Tea Party leaders testifying alongside with the ACLU on this bill, because I think people, and I know you've talked about this extensively, you guys. And it's pushing the poorest people further into poverty. So it passed 34-0 out of the Senate, went over to the House. It has now been referred. So I would anticipate right after spring break, talking to Speaker Deal actually before we left, that this is going to get attention in the House. What the bill does, and it's pretty significant, it cleans up definitions about what actually is revenue, so you can't skirt around the law and mess around with what is actually revenue. It lowers the cap from 30% to 10%. And what it also does is it says that if the excess over that 10% is supposed to go to local schools, and if you don't remit that to those local schools within 60 days of the overage, disincorporation is automatically on the ballot in the next general election. So we're going to transfer the power back to the people. They're going to be able to decide whether or not you're doing a good job or not. And I think it'll lead to some pretty substantial reform. You've seen a lot of attention, even nationally, with the DOJ report, and then even some things even just sort of tongue-in-cheek about what are the real problems. I think John Oliver had something on his last week's show about this stuff. So it's significant, and I am really confident that we're going to get something done.
Disincorporation vote. Uplands Park tried to disincorporate themselves, and 50-something% voted to disincorporate, but they needed 60%, which is, almost impossible.
Well, part of the problem with any kind of disincorporation process right now is it takes to even get it on the ballot, it takes such a super majority of voters to put it on the ballot, and then you need the 60%. We're not messing with the percentage under state law right now for disincorporation, but we are saying that very difficult process of getting on the ballot, we're not going to have to worry about that anymore. If you have such a high percentage of your revenue from traffic tickets and fines, it's going to be on the ballot. People are going to be able to decide.
Some people have said that this might help some of the symptoms, but it doesn't go to the heart of the problem, and that is these police officers in these cities targeting people. And so this might solve some of the problems, but does it really solve all the problems?
Well, I've never claimed that this is a silver bullet, but I think that when you really get down to what is one of the major issues that is fueling a lot of this injustice, and a lot of it is these cities looking at this as revenue generation, and the people that live in their communities are hurt the most. In North St. Louis County now, they're predominantly African American, but this exists all over the state, quite frankly.
Right.
And I think it's just, as it is broken down the trust between people in their government and people in their courts, and that's a big problem. The courts are supposed to be there to decipher what is just and to be independent and make these decisions, not be a revenue arm for the city that city manager doesn't want to make tough decisions. And I think the great example that has been used, and it is so obvious as they sit in a hotel room with their speed camera, is St. Anne along Highway 70. They wrote about 1,000 tickets 6 years ago. Now they write 9,000. They had $500,000 worth of revenue. Now they have $3.5 million. And the only thing that's different in that city is the mall is closed.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to be rocket science to figure out what's going on.
Eric Schmitt, you want to run for treasurer. You're in the process of doing that. Your party has gone through quite a bit of bloody nose over the last couple of weeks with Tom Schweik committing suicide, the allegations of a whisper campaign, John Hancock. Now you have some donors coming out saying he did and he didn't and he did and he didn't. What's your thoughts on all that?
Well, I think as a candidate, somebody that's running statewide, what I need to focus on right now is just getting around, and like I am to all the counties across our state. It's a big state, but more importantly than any of that, I think just recognizing that the loss of Tom Schweik is just a big loss for the state. My heart and my prayers still go out to his family, and I haven't really looked at that aspect of it from the political lens. But as far as my race goes, I'm just continuing to work as hard as I can and try to make the case to the voters.
John Hancock is the head of your state party. Do you support him as the head of your state party?
Well,
Because people have come out and said that they don't support him.
Sure, I'm a state senator, and so I don't really have a say in that. That is really the state. That is the state committee's job to elect a party chairman, and that's where this decision is right now.
That's a nice political answer. I'll let it slide only because you're a supporter of Nurses for Newborns. Otherwise, I'd be going after you. I'd be going after you a lot harder than that. I just want it on the record. Now, the next time Nurses for Newborns need something from you,
I am always there for Nurses for Newborns.
There you go, Eric Schmitt. Thanks for coming in. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
It's 7:30 here, Big 550 KTRS.